Hello and welcome to the People's Playbook podcast. We're excited. Today we have one of our favorite guests, Brian Bazely. He's a seasoned entrepreneur. He's an architect on how to build a franchise, and he's the former CEO and co-founder of Driver Seat, one of Canada's top franchise brands. After working so hard and building that entire brand and getting that up to scale, he says, hey, I'm going to sell this company, okay, and get rid of that. But now he actually advises companies, and he acts as a fractional CEO and a CFO, but not a CFO like you think, a CFO, Chief Franchise Officer, which I love that he kept that title through Bazely Consulting. He's passionate. He's an advocate for culture and a people-first mindset and helping businesses scale and grow the right way. So welcome, Brian, to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great. Would other people tell you how they feel about you? It's like, wow, I did some things in my career, right?
I'm blushing just a little bit.
I love it. I love it. So, hey, let's get right into it. So, Brian, what pulled you from C-suite into founding your own company?
Actually, kind of interesting. For me, life's always been a journey. It's all about what we're kind of doing every day. And it was really not one specific thing. It was just more of this desire to try something new, try something a little bit different. And essentially, moving into being an entrepreneur or owning my own business was my first opportunity to work from Kitchener-Waterloo, which is where I live. The rest of my career, I spent either on a plane or working out of Toronto or other cities. And so, yeah, it was just an opportunity to do something a little bit different, to experience a different way to live my life.
Yeah. And how many years ago was that, Brian? I'm not trying to age you, but I always ask, when did you start your own kind of company and what era of your life were you in at that time?
Yeah, so it was 16 years ago.
Okay.
I was in my 30s, and one of the interesting parts of the story is my wife, who's now my wife of 34 years, my wife who's always been so supportive of everything that I do. When I got home and started chatting with her about it, she kind of looked at me strange because she knows that I've always loved work, always loved working with the people I work with. And she said, "You want to quit?" I said, "Yeah." It might take a couple of years for me to wind down my career, but I said, "Yeah, at some point I want to leave that and move into doing this." And she said, "Did you have a bad day?" I said, "No, actually, I had a really great day." And I said, I really want an opportunity to work locally in the market, own a business, and to just move into a different experience.
Yeah. Unbelievable. And if you could go back to when you started the business, can you remember one people decision that you made early in driver's seat that changed everything? So at first it's probably you, but how did you start to build it?
One of the most interesting parts of that story, I think, is the fact that we developed the core values and the governance around people before we knew what the industry was and before we knew what the name of the company was. And this is actually not a well-known part of the driver seat story, but driver seat started in 2011, but it wasn't actually launched until 2012. I didn't know what the business was going to be. I just knew I wanted to work with really great people, and we knew we wanted to put people first. And so I'd seen a kind of this need for people to get into a franchising opportunity, but who may not have had significant amounts of capital. And so I wanted to create a scalable business, which is how we went about doing that. And so, yeah, it was actually one of the biggest decisions we took was to say we're going to build a people first business. We're going to have a legacy around it. We're going to have fun with it. And now, oh yeah, we just have to figure out what's the industry going to be and what's the business going to be called.
Let's put this up first and then let's have some fun. But what do you want to do to have that fun?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it took us a year to figure out what to launch, because we'd never worked in transportation before. But that just happened to be the vehicle, pun intended, to open the business.
Yeah. Were you ever scared?
I think you'd be foolish not to be scared, or at least have some levels of apprehension at times, for sure.
Yeah.
There was a big financial commitment to doing that. And when you leave a really great paying job and at some point your last paycheck comes in and you're doing this, there's a fear of that. But there's actually a second part of the fear. Again, we don't talk about this too often, but this fear of failure, not necessarily in your own eyes, but in your friends and your family's eyes, because you're putting it all out there. You're saying, I'm going to walk away from what I've been doing. I've been successful, however that's measured, different ways, I guess. But we're going to do this. And you really don't want to fail, because you're going to try something that's never been done before, in this case, franchising transportation. And you just don't want to look foolish in front of people. Right. So yeah, a little bit. I wouldn't say it was going to keep me up at night, but certainly there was a lot of money going into it and my time. And then I was putting my name and my brand behind it.
That was very transparent and honest what you said there, because all of us who have gone into our own business have had that feeling like, I don't want to fail.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to fail. And by the way, everybody sees that I have this really cool job, high paying job, and it's safe. Why the heck you would do it? And one of my mentors actually said to me, first they ask you why, and then they ask you how.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And so
I
it
love it.
always stuck with me. But if you think of those days when you started the franchise and you take all the company that you built, what would you say is the number one trait that makes a great franchise leader today? So what would you say out of all those people you've dealt with and brought into driver's seat, what did you say, hey, this is what the great ones had in common? And maybe this is what the blind spot was for some of the ones that didn't do as well.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Opening a business is tough. And even as a franchisee, so someone that's going to buy into a franchise brand, there's still a significant amount of work to do, even though some of the pre-work's been done for you. And I think the best ones were those that were and are very industrious, and they truly follow the model of putting people first. They understand that we're in this journey together and that we're going to start from a position of trust of one another. So they're just good people. They've got their own shortfalls, as we all do. They've got lots of strengths, but they're industrious, and they start from a position of trust. And because when we had this really wonderful franchise owner, and he was a nurse and had no experience running a business. Not only did he launch and took a driver's seat franchise on right away, but he quickly landed the single largest contract, a $3 million plus contract, and he won that almost right away. It was a little bit of work, of course, to get there. But this is a guy that went from doing $0 to doing millions of dollars and had to quickly learn the recipe that we were teaching him about how to be a great boss. And what a wonderful boss he is. He just is truly just an awesome person. But the people first side of it was pretty evident with him. And so we knew we picked the right person that way. But when things really took off and he was really cranking out with this big contract, the very next thing he did was look how to grow his business and said, I'm not going to be a one contract wonder. I'm going to build other, and that speaks to how industrious and his thought process. So, yeah, I think those types of individuals really tend to do very well. People who are apprehensive, that can be fine at times, but if they're apprehensive because they don't trust either the recipe, the model, the people that they're working with, that tends to bring itself up and over in the conversation.
Trust and communication very, very strongly today, which I love. But here's my next question. So when you manage multiple group of people that each has their different franchise and they're all different personalities,
Mm-hmm.
how do you keep the brand culture alive and well? So how do you say, hey, listen, I know that everybody has a bad day and whatnot, but how do you say, hey, how did you go about saying, hey, because everything I hear about driver's seat was the culture was amazing, right? And hopefully it still is. How did you keep that alive and well with so many different personalities and so many different levels of experience? How did you do that?
Yeah, great question, and one of my favorite topics, of course. But one of the things that we did, and I'm spending a lot of time teaching other companies how to go about doing this now, but it's a strange thing, but we operationalized culture. And so people don't think about operations and culture hand in hand. They typically will think about operations being the tactical or mechanical components of what you do. And if you try and have a company define culture, it's kind of like having them try to nail jello to a tree. They
Yeah,
can't really get their head around, how to
that's great.
describe it. And so when I talk about operationalizing culture, what it means is there are certain things that we have to do in order to hit a threshold for culture within the company. I'll use a couple of very brief examples, but one of them was we would hold video meetings, as every company has to hold video meetings these days. We'd hold video meetings. We insisted that the franchise partners be at the meeting. And so there was rewards for being there, but there's penalties for not being there because this was a business meeting that we were expecting them to be at. And they had to be there in advance of the meeting starting. The screen had to be on. They had to be in an office setting. They had to engage in the meeting at a minimum once. And this was one of the things we did because if you can imagine trying to build a very strong, robust culture of a team moving together, but some people could just not show up, right? You're never going to have that. And if you use a sports analogy, it'd be like the football coach saying to the team, like, hey, we're going to hold a practice. And if some of you guys want to come, just go ahead and come. And if you don't want to come, that's okay too, right? That would never work. They would never win. And so that was a really big part of it. We also did things like braided paying it forward. And paying it forward is where, of course, a franchisee will do something else for another franchisee. And for those people from outside franchise, I know you have a lot of franchise experience as well, so you'll appreciate this. But the unknown superpower of a franchise system is the strength of those franchisees and how smart they are. And I always prided myself in never being the smartest person in the room because it was just so great to collect up these people. And it was unbelievable. Every time somebody thought they were just doing something so amazing, somebody else was doing it better. And we built very strong programs to ensure that level of collaboration. But the Pay It Forward Award, which was personally was my personal favorite in handing out every year, was voted on by the franchisees for who else had the biggest impact in helping them grow, nurture, personally develop, professionally develop, etc. And you can imagine a group of franchisees in a big room, and you start calling up the third place winner, and then everyone's clapping. You get them up there, and then the second place winner is like, and everybody's just getting all revved up, and who's going to be the first one? And that person is being recognized by their peers for doing the greatest amount to help. And what seems like a fairly small piece became pretty monstrous because this was this culture of I'm going to do more for the group as a whole and do a little less just for my own business, or not think about doing stuff just for my own business, even though that's very important as well, right? And so it's kind of like in hockey, it's kind of like the assist to the goal, right? It's just as important.
It's amazing when you get recognized by your peers, how much more that means to you, right?
Sure does.
And you can have any award you want, but the one that your team votes on, that's the one that means the most. And that's the one that brings tears to your eyes and you just say, I can't believe this, right?
Exactly.
Great segue, because you built up this amazing company, right? And then you said, hey, it's time for me to let go. And you said, hey, it's time for me to sell it, maybe give the reins to somebody else and explore new frontiers. How did that feel, letting Driver Seat go? And what did you learn from that, from letting go?
So it was a really good time for me to do that. The business has lots of runway ahead of it. It's got lots of growth. There's a lot of work to do there still, but it didn't need the type of work I was going to be doing, which was, building it up. Let's face it, I already made all the mistakes that were to be made, right? And so very tough because Driver Seat was truly like my third child.
Yeah.
And when I look through my closet, the amount of driver seat clothing I had, and,
Yeah.
and the list goes on and on. It was just really an integral part of my life. Now, it wasn't my identity. It was a very important part of my life. And so when I looked at it, I said, first of all, this will be very healthy for the franchisees because under a very minor shift in leadership, because it just continued to go, they'll be able to prosper and do great things. And really, there wasn't that level of work for me to do there. So I didn't ever want to spend a day there where I wasn't putting in 110% and didn't right up until the very day. But it's also very tough. The tough part's the relationships because I'm still friends with so many of them. I'm still connected with so many of them. But as you know, you just don't get to see them to the same extent every day. Right. That part became tough. The idea of doing it was this is a very good next natural chapter in my life. And I wouldn't have done it if they had needed me there, and they didn't. And so it was a good time to move that part on.
Yeah, you built it so it could be moved on, right? And you built it. And
absolutely.
It's funny, every time I talk to a leader, they always say that they miss the people the most. And you just said that, you forged a lot of great relationships. You built this, you were in the trenches with these people. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, it's time for me to go, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. I like one of the things that I saw on your LinkedIn and some of the verbiage about you. And one of them was how you call yourself a franchise architect.
Mm-hmm.
When I say that to you, what does that actually mean to you? What does being a franchise architect mean?
Franchise is just an incredible way to grow a business. But typically what happens is somebody will own a business. It could be a restaurant, it could be a service-based business or what have you. And they'll want to franchise it. And so they fast forward to a franchise lawyer who then helps to put together franchise documents. And many of them are really good at helping advise as well. But their primary job is to make sure that the legal documents and the structure are set up properly. And so many times that business won't prosper or may not meet all that it possibly can from a growth perspective because it's not architected or designed properly. And so the way I like to describe this, I'll go back to another sports analogy, but the way I like to describe this, and so the franchise lawyer is typically the bottom of the seventh inning in a baseball game. The owner of that business is in their first inning. And so they're going to jump to the bottom of the seventh, not play the other six, but hope to win the game. And so the architecting and design elements are me playing those 6 innings with them. And it's a really important part of it because when we build out how to operationalize culture, when we build out proper support systems, when we build out what is the most effective way to nurture and attract leads into the business, when we build out what does support look like from a standpoint of communication, but also what's proactive support, how do you go about building that in? How do you ensure that franchisees stay engaged? Huge problem in the franchise industry is disengaged franchisees. How do you make sure that you have franchisees staying engaged? How do you act as a leader in general, but also how do you act as a leader in a remote setting? Because many of them might not have experienced that. And then finally, how do you act as a leader to people who are business owners? Far more complex than employees. And so we architect and design out all of those elements. And then it includes some strategic decisions around what does the territory look like? How do the royalties get fed in? What does the percentage, does that make sense from a financial perspective? Can you afford to do this? Do we have enough free cash flow in order to manage that? And so when I architect that all out with them, we end up with a very strong franchise system that is off to a very, very good start right off the get-go versus having to try and learn or struggle through those things later on.
You actually build a real sound structure with them before they actually, you're not
Ex-
building a structure on quicksand. You're saying, hey, let's make this last for years and
Exactly.
years and years, right? And
Exactly.
hopefully they can actually pass that down to their family or sell it for a profit or whatever they
Yeah.
need to do at their time
Well,
when they're ready to take the lead.
no, that's exactly right, Jason. They will end up growing faster. They won't peak the way many franchise systems do, because many do peak because they just haven't built enough of this infrastructure. And they typically, some of them will learn about that over the course of time, which costs a lot of time and money, right?
Yeah.
And so, when people think about franchising, they typically will think about the big brands, right? Recipes Unlimited and Tim Hortons and McDonald's, and the list goes on. But a majority of the 1,200 franchise brands in Canada, majority of them, over 1,000 of them, are very small organizations. So, part of my personal silly goal is I'm going to fix the challenge of disenfranchised franchisees, and I'm going to help people architect so that the next 1,000 brands that get brought about are built out properly.
You look, you just talked about the industry as a whole, right? So if you could look at that industry as a whole and say, hey, where do franchisors go wrong when they start scaling? Where, in your personal opinion, when you see a franchise or trying to expand and scale, where do you think they make a mistake most of the time, or you've seen that mistake happen?
Yeah, I think it really hits two fronts. The first is some of the stuff wasn't purposefully designed or designed with purpose, in that they're making decisions based on what's happening that quarter or that month, not on what the overall strategic design needs to be.
Yes.
That's the primary challenge with it. And that's the part I think is absolutely fixable in this growth market. The second part is we'll go back to the people side for a moment. So franchisees are people, they're business owners, they're family people, they've got their own insecurities, they've got their own challenges. And we have to build structure that says, you have a job to do, I have a job to do. Collectively, we will accomplish a great deal together. But you have to have a franchisor that's empathetic and truly is able to listen to some of the challenges, because we won't be right on everything. We're not going to be right on everything. And so we have to course correct it and adjust. And it doesn't mean that you're kind of the slave to the system or a slave to the franchisees in that sense. As a great leader, you're going to lead by being out there with them, by understanding what's going on with them. You have to make some tough calls sometimes and move them through and help get out of their own way. But the reality is, working with people, it could be the head office support staff, or it could be the people that are franchise owners and their teams. It's really all about that connectivity with them, right? And it's just such an important part. And so I think often franchisors will allow friction to occur, right? And sometimes that friction just slows things down. Sometimes it costs money. Sometimes it takes energy away from the head office staff. And so one of the things I never ever allowed, is for a franchisee to be rude, upset, or create friction with my team at the office. And it's not because my team were perfect, because I'm not perfect. Of course, none of us were perfect, but that there's ways to handle that. And so
Sure there is.
we had a zero tolerance on that. I would call them out if that happened, because there are times in business when people get frustrated or what have you, and you have to address and deal with those things. And so the employment brand, which is part of my cultural component, the employment brand at our office was just as important as what we did out with the franchisees in the field. And I wanted our folks to come here and really support the franchisees and really build that up. But when you say what happens with some will allow that friction to fester and hope it's going to go away, and it doesn't go away unless you deal with it, right? It really doesn't.
Direct conversations are necessary in this business for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And it sounds like you don't have a problem having those direct conversations. Could you take me back to a time where hey, it was a tough time in the industry or the market, and how you dealt with that. And it could be wrong. You might have, some franchises had problems during COVID, some didn't, some thrived during COVID. But can you think of a time in your runway with this where you said, wow, that was a really difficult time because of the environment we were in? And
Hmm.
how did you manage people through that? Because you're a real people first leader. You come across as very empathetic. And I could just guarantee that you probably wore that. So how did you get through those tough times, as every franchisor has to go through sometimes? And how did you just deal with the people in those times?
Yeah, and for us, for sure, it was COVID. We had gone on a real growth curve. We built up a lot of business systems, invested a lot in 2017, 2018. So in 2019, we were really set for growth. And so our growth had been good there, but in 2019, we really took off. So we were becoming a fairly big brand heading into 2020. And then COVID hit. And we did some work so our business was to shuttle people around in mid-sized vans. We did some work in transporting employees, but a majority of our business, a big majority of it, was taking people to weddings, to airport, and to brewery tours and wine tours. And so, as you can imagine, that went to zero, that went to zero, and that went to zero. And so, franchisees were scared. And I'd never managed through a global pandemic before. When you start to think about the level of implications that are there, there's a lot. And some of those implications are tied to the fact that they're frightened for their family, right? My mom's 96 now, but she was in her 90s when COVID hit. That was scary for us. And so we got together as a team and we said, look, we've never managed through COVID, through a health pandemic before. What are we going to do? And we came up with a 4-tier strategy and we stuck with it all the way through COVID. But one of the strategic components was you have to be very healthy in order to run a business, both physically and mentally. And so we're going to make sure that we're going to help our franchisees mentally and physically. And so we were doing things like virtual workouts where we could. We were doing nutrition training, educating on how to manage from home in this kind of confined environment, when to turn the news off, right? Those types of things. So we could help try and manage as best as we could through that period. And one of the 4 tiers of the strategy was we won't do anything that doesn't help flatten the curve. And so even though there's lots of money in it, we're not going to do it. And so this second one, it really caused some conflict because franchisees were saying, look, there's a loophole in the law. We can drive across the border and pick up people who aren't supposed to be traveling because we're allowed to. And we said, yes, but that doesn't fit that part of the strategy, so we're not going to do it. So what we did was we came up with a strategy. We started moving forward on it. I gave everyone 9 days to grieve. And then we decided at the end of the 9th day, grieving's over. We need to get back to business. And so I started calling, and my wife always recounts this, but I did 365 straight days of phone calls every single day talking to franchisees. And it was really important because they were afraid. But what we had to do is we had to determine which parts of that group weren't going to continue, and we had to help them with dignity, find other work, and go and do something else, close up. We had to take the people that were going to prosper and really help them and build them up. And then we had to take this middle ground and move them towards that prosperous ground. And so our revenue went down to $0, not quite zero, but pretty close to it. And we started mobilizing and in a really big way. And the franchisees did such incredible work. It was amazing. And so we started learning and we failed on some programs, but we won on some programs. Lo and behold, 2 years later, we were up 69% in sales over pre-COVID times. We built a bunch of new contracts. We had governmental contracts. We had lots of struggles still, lots of challenges, and everyone had lots of anxiety around what happened with COVID. But it was a really important growth window for driver's seat. Interesting enough, one of the things I like to talk with people about who are in business is long COVID. And I'm not talking about the health version of long COVID. I'm talking about the business version of long COVID because people who are business owners have faced trauma through COVID. And so they're actually not the same people anymore. And we all have to realize that. And so it's really an incredible piece, though, because at networking events, as an example, you'd walk up to somebody and say, hey, it's so good to see you. How's that business going? And everything was great. And this was great. And that was great. And, typical type of conversation at a networking event. Now I walk up, I say, hey, since COVID now, it's been a couple of years. What's your long COVID? What's changed about you that will never change back again? And all of a sudden they open up and they say, and there's lots of things that come out, but some of it's like, I just don't have the stamina anymore I used to. I don't want to face some of the things I used to, right? I'm more comfortable with a smaller business, or I don't ever want to be in a position of failure or potential failure. So everybody in different businesses has different reactions to this long COVID, but they're all faced with it, which is super interesting because it was a traumatic time for people.
Totally was. And what you said there, I just love your approach. Is everybody deals with it differently, right? And when you deal with things differently, what matters to you might not matter to me,
That's
right?
right.
And we got to get to the root of that. How do you spot? Because you've been pretty good at, I don't know if it's your gut or how you do it, but you've spotted some really good, strong people to bring into the franchise. What do you look for in people when you say, hey, you know what? I think that person's a potential franchisee. And the reason I ask that, Brian, is a lot of franchisors, they think, hey, is there a paycheck coming here? Let's get that, that finder's fee and get that going and whatnot. Everything you talk about seems to be completely the opposite. It's all about people and about culture and helping them get to a better place. So what is that quality you look for in a person that you say, you know what, I think driver's seat might be a good game for you?
Yeah, I think when I start with somebody that's going to love working with people, because at the end of the day, they're going to be an employer. And so they don't have to be super experienced in it, but they have to have a real love, passion for people and people's success. And again, going through this journey with them. That's a really important one. But the other side of it is there's a lot of people who are fairly transactional, and I don't say that in a negative way. Just that might be their upbringing, might be just what their life experience has provided to them. But they're fairly transactional in their approach to things. It's like, can you tell me this so I can get that? Really not understanding the larger picture. And so part of the process is to help them unpack that and understand that side of it. And when you see their eyes light up that they're starting to get it, they're starting to really understand it, you've got something really great there. But sometimes they just resort back to, very simple kind of a approach to it without any level of complex thinking. And in some cases, some of those people actually are better off working for somebody else. They're better off in a job, right? And often they can be quite successful in doing so. But this type of individual who, when you think about it, they're going to go, I'm not worried about the number of hours I work. I'm not going to work to brag that I work a lot. That's not what it's all about, right? I'm going to enjoy my time with family. I'm never going to feel guilty if I'm coaching my kids' soccer game at 3 p.m. instead of running the business because I run a successful business. But I'm never going to be afraid of hard work. I'm never going to be afraid of these things. And often I ask a lot of questions of prospective franchisees when we interview them. And I'm working with a number of different brands now. And of course, we have the opportunity at these tail end of these conversations to start to ask a lot of intelligent questions, or to see what kind of intelligent questions they're asking, I should say. And it's really interesting to hear what's coming out of them, because in some cases, they're really talking about building up something that's special to them, building a legacy, building something their kids would be proud of. And you start to hear these things like, you're going to be really good at this. You're going to make some mistakes like we all do, but you're going to be really good at this. And that's very different from somebody who gets fixated on, just the numbers. They're super important. That's what guides us, but they get fixated on those things, or they get fixated on just the expenses, right? Which, of course, they've got to manage. But I mean, we should be able to do that before we have our morning coffee, quite frankly.
Absolutely. I know you work with a lot of companies, so I want your kind of expert opinion on this. And when you go into a company right now as the fractional CEO or the architect or whatever you're doing with that company, what do you think the one mistake a growing company makes when it comes to culture? A growing company. So, things are going well, we're growing, we're doing well, but what do you think they make a mistake on when they're dealing with culture?
Yeah, this will encompass a lot, but it all starts 100% of the times it starts with this. Culture is not part of their strategy. So they've got a strategy, and I've seen some really amazing strategic documents before. Man, they were pretty, and they got some really nice gloss to them, and they're on a PowerPoint slide. And there's such great levels of detail about, if it's a restaurant, about the recipes and about the ovens and about the temperature of the ovens and the cleaning protocols. I mean, they're down to every square inch. And then you go through this thick 40-page document, and there's not one thing about culture. And so one of the questions I often ask when I'm doing a keynote presentation or talking with a group, I'll say, that's great for all the people in the C-suite positions. Please stand up, right? I'll say, stay standing if you've got a strategy written. And of course, they'll all stay standing, right? I say, okay, now stay standing if you've got a strategy written that incorporates a portion about culture that's longer than 10 pages. And 100% of them sit down. And this is a very big challenge, is culture seen as birthday cakes and celebrating birthdays and silly lunches and things like that. There's a little bit of that can go on as well. But culture is really, what are you doing about your employment brand, and what are you doing to attract incredible people to this business and how you tie that into the culture of your organization so that you can attract the best people, but also so that as you grow, it's a sustainable growth because you've got this huge group of people that absolutely have your back, right? Which they will. I spoke to a group of CEOs and they're all far more successful than me from a standpoint of just running big companies, and just over 20 of them at this group. I was speaking to them about the employment brand and whose responsibility is it to have an employment brand. And of course, a lot of them referred to their HR director or vice president. As we talked more about the employment brand, we talked about the importance of their role in the employment brand and what are they posting on LinkedIn, how this goes about doing this. And as we talked a little bit about, we did a little bit of a survey on how many people they were looking for or they were short at the associate manager or manager level or above. And of course, the numbers were unbelievable. There were just so many. And at that time, I had 0 openings, driver's seat. We were fast growth, hiring a lot of people, but I had 0 openings at that time. But I had 5 people who had applied to a job that didn't exist. They just applied just to come work with us. And when I shared the story and I shared some snippets from the LinkedIn post, there was one girl from Texas and she just said, I've never met you guys. I want to come work there. And so what's involved, here's the type of work I do. If it's something I can add value in, then great, but here's what I want to do. And I was sharing the snippets with them. I said, this comes because we built a strong employment brand that's tied to people, and it's a people first culture. And because we did that, we just are attracting great people. So we don't have that challenge that you have, right? I said, but all of you have the power to do that, but you have to own it. You're the CEO. That's part of your job. Your job's not the widget that you're manufacturing. You got people that can do that. Your job is the culture.
I'm going to ask you one last question because
Sure.
I know your reputation and I want to see what your eyes are on right now. And then you've been so generous with your time today, and then I'm going to let you go and probably do 1,000 other things that you have to get to. But if I had to ask Brian Bazely, what is the number one thing you're looking at right now? What's getting your attention right now in franchising or leadership, right? Because I know you do a lot of things with leadership. What is that right now? What's grabbing your attention that you say, wow, that's pretty cool, or that intrigues me?
Great question. People often look at franchising. If they're in the restaurant business, of course, it's kind of a natural. It's one of the number one ways to grow a restaurant brand. But people often look at franchising and they say, well, if you're a restaurant brand or if you've been around for 20 years, you might be able to franchise this business. And it's just not well known to somebody that's outside of franchising. But the one thing that's really grabbed my attention is the amount of interest in franchising for very unique services and businesses. And I think that it just really is a cool opportunity for anybody that wants to grow a business. Not that all of them are good ideas. It's a good idea to chat about that and unpack that a little bit. But I'll give you an example. I'm in the process right now of franchising an oncology group. We are going to franchise pharmaceutical cancer care. It is so powerful. It's so magnificent. This group, ECPN is the name of it, but this group, they've been doing this for over 20 years. They specialize in oncology and really built this incredible formulary over the last 6 years. And we got together, started talking about ways to grow that business. And it turned out the franchising 2 other pharmacies and bridging that gap, so to speak, we're going to fundamentally change cancer care, right? At least pharmaceutical-based cancer care, which is not all of it, but in all of Ontario to start and then growing it out from there. And when I think about the impact, because we've all been touched by cancer, of course, right, in one degree or another to some degree. But when I think about the impact that we're going to have on patient care in Ontario, it just blows my mind. I'm so excited about it. And so I think about this and I think about all of the opportunities for people that have businesses. So any type of business that generates revenue. I'm really excited about this opportunity to grow it through franchising, because it really is a wonderful way to grow a business. You're working with entrepreneurs, you're working with bright people who've got money invested, right? And they've got a proven track record of some sort. That's how they got the money in the first place. And I love that side of it. I really love the idea of finding different businesses that want to grow their business. By the way, that's just one example, but there's just so many very cool examples this way. And so it's healthy for the franchisor, it's healthy for the franchisee, it's healthy for the employee group. It's really healthy for the economy. Franchising, it's the 12th largest industry in Canada now. So it's super healthy that way. So that part I'm really excited about. And then from a leadership standpoint, I think that people like yourself who are really talking more about this type of thing and getting this out to the public, that's really, really healthy, because so many people are business owners but not leaders. And listen, we can teach them that. We can teach them that. That's the fun part of this is you've got a great business, you've got a great business model, you're making money at this. You want to grow it through maybe perhaps through corporate sites or licenses, or perhaps through franchising, or maybe you want to grow just in your one individual unit. We just have to improve your leadership skill set, and there's lots of tools like this to do it. I'm really feeling optimistic, but not in a not informed way. I'm feeling very, very optimistic in the true form around the potential of what we can do from a leadership standpoint and what I'm seeing from a franchising standpoint.
Brian, what a great answer. And I thank you for that. I have to tell you, when I talk about leadership, I always tell people, I say, I want you to think of the best leader you ever had, and I want you to think of the worst leader you ever had. And they remember both vividly, right?
Sure they do.
And I always say the ones that you loved and that made a difference in your life, make sure you text them, make sure you phone them and say thank you for that, right?
Yeah.
So it's obvious, just on how empathetic you are. I'm sure that you would get a lot of texts and a lot of phone calls based on your leadership and the empathy and the 365 calls you made, like 365 days in a year that you were calling people during a terrible time in the economy and the environment. So I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for what you created. I thank you for your time today. It's been excellent spending some time with you. And we will make sure that we have your contact information if anybody wants to reach out and talk to you directly.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Thank you. Yeah, really appreciated that. Appreciate chatting with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you. If you loved that session and that conversation as much as I did, would love to have you join our People Playbook community in the link below.